So today I'm doing an interview with trans widow Uta Hagen. She has a YouTube channel of the same title, and I stumbled upon her YouTube channel maybe a month or so ago. I don't know how, but I did, and I think she has so much insights as a trans widow, and I think it's a beautiful channel, and I'm really happy to be interviewing her. So I hope you guys enjoy the interview, and like and subscribe. Please support me if you want to on Buy Me a Coffee. Links in the bio. Also support Uta and support her channel. Um, Appreciate everybody who's been watching and commenting, and keep it up. Thank you. All right, so today we have Uta Hagen. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited. I'm gonna go ahead and just throw it to her to introduce herself real quick, and then we're gonna get into our chat. I think we have a lot to talk about.
Well, hello. And Carol, I'm just so thrilled to be making direct contact with you, and I'm grateful for your generosity. And I am the author of In the Curated Woods, an illustrated memoir with many pictures of my woods and what I do to restore the native plants there, and through that, especially restore one native butterfly called the Great Spangled Fritillary. I also, under another pen name, Leah Utsira, my children's book author name, have written a couple of children's books. This
Oh,
is
cool.
one to help a child who has had a grandparent who died. And
Oh,
this is literally my sort of opus to my mother, who died at age 100 in 2019.
wow.
And it took me a year to write this very short children's book, also illustrated with photographs from my woods and my gardens. And it has helped me. I mean, she led a long life and died a just death. And I had a hard time even so, even though I
Mhm.
was already over 60 and had no right to expect my mother to live to over 100. And so in this way, I've used writing with photography for self-healing. And I am known as a trans widow. Uh, I almost every day I try to think of what could be another word for our category, but trans widow has stuck. Um, and it's actually suits the situation in many ways
Mhm.
because the men that we divorced call their past life or their past name their dead name.
Yeah.
They have all sorts of terms, which Richie Herron, a British transitioner, calls a veneration of death. And so sometimes, people get exercised about the use of the word widow in the term trans widow, but it's actually quite apt. Um,
Mhm.
because we no longer have our husbands in many ways. Most of us have lost significant parts of our communities, sometimes including relatives. What happened in my situation is that I decided, I guess, partially as a result of some emotional fallout from the shutdowns of 2020, I decided to tell my two grown sons some of what I experienced when they were little involving their father. And part of it was because just through a little thing I looked up online, I discovered, way after the fact, that my ex, whom I call Nettie in my memoir, um, committed financial fraud in court.
Mhm.
And he got out of paying child support by asking for the mercy of the court because, of course, he's unemployed and he's just getting minimum wage. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was in a contract to become the chief operating officer of a tech firm. And later on, the second financial fraud he committed was, mislisting what his salary was because his, the value of the equity in the company he was in contract to receive after 20 years or something like that was part of his income.
Yeah.
And he managed to falsely, for court purposes, make his income look like it wasn't higher than mine as a New York City public school
This
teacher.
this seems to be just this is a story you hear over and over and over again.
Right.
If you listen to trans widows' stories, right? It's
Yes.
it's it's the taking of the family money. It's hiding the money all for the purpose of their obsession.
Yes. And it's sanctioned by the therapist, psychologist, and so on. Now, back in the early 1990s, or possibly it went back to the late 1980s, when Nettie was going to the practitioner who was unlicensed, had in fact no college degree at all, whom I call Ruth the charlatan in the memoir. And it's like a, it's like a title, like even "the" is capitalized.
Yeah. Well, I like it.
You know, like Richard the Lionhearted, right?
Right?
Ruth
Yeah.
the
Ruth the
charlatan,
charlatan.
okay? And, she, made a cash-only business close in proximity to Grand Central Station in Manhattan in the late 1980s into the 1990s at least. Um, having she had a perfectly appointed, aromatherapy, little floofy dogs, studio where men like my husband could go and have the little dog on his lap and tell her how annoying he found his wife and little children and how he just is feeling so distraught and how is he going to get on this path and how is he going to convince his wife that actually they're lesbians.
Mm. I cannot tell you how frustrating that is for
I
us.
know. Yes, and what's wonderful is that I had a number of lesbian friends. I had sort of a team of lesbian friends that I knew from various social groups and from my teaching and so on and so on. And, they were great people, and I used to make this joke, when I was home alone and not where someone would, eavesdrop on us and then kick us out of a restaurant or something. I would say, "Well, it's too bad that I, Uta, am such a flaming heterosexual, because, if I was a lesbian, maybe this would all, like, be resolved." But I had been a dancer since I was 14, and I was in the ballet studios and in modern dance technique classes and all this stuff with some of the most beautiful, sexy women in the world, and I never felt this sexual attraction to any of them. So don't you think that kind of is I'm pretty sure about it, and I don't really need to do this thing where I pretend that my angular husband's body is female and
Well,
I'm in
that's the
love with
thing.
it?
That's the thing. It's like this goes back to the whole thing. It's you cannot change sex, right? You can have these medical procedures and you can take these drugs to change your appearance somewhat to the opposite sex, mimicking the opposite sex, but you are not the opposite sex. You never will be. And this idea that sexuality is just superficial is
Oh, yeah,
absurd. It's not
right,
superficial at all.
right. Yes, and Ruth the charlatan, the one time that I saw her for the, 50-minute hour after I discovered, made the last discovery, which was that he had been on estrogen for probably 6 months or something,
Mm.
and he was getting breast development, and I was sort of, starting to look at him because he was always wearing 3 shirts or something. at home, right? And so finally I saw him without a shirt on and he looked like me when I was maybe 13.
Oh, Lord.
And and I was like, "Oh, you did this and you promised you wouldn't do this unless you told me." And so he was really trying to do that thing of letting the temperature of the water just get a little bit on the higher and a little bit higher, and maybe I wouldn't realize. Or maybe I would somehow accept it, or I would, make the sacrifice for the children, whatever.
Now you say she didn't have a license or anything. Was she able to
Yeah.
give him a letter for transition?
Okay, he started all of that, I believe well, it might have gone back even to 1989 or 1990, which would have been when I was pregnant with our second child. I believe that he was actually sneaking out to these, cash only appointments when I was pregnant with our second child.
I've also heard that a lot, that
Well,
the men
there's a
start to do
pregnancy
this.
fetish. There's a pregnancy and a breastfeeding
Well,
thing. It's
that's yeah, that's true.
yeah.
I also think it has something to do with just being jealous too.
Yes.
Jealous
Yes.
of the babies,
Yes.
which is, oh my god, sick.
Yes. Well, it is. It's a I would characterize it as somewhere along the lines of the black and white thinking of autistic traits, along with, personal histories of abuse, physical or sexual abuse or whatever. So, and it was when I made this discovery, it was the night before our younger son's fourth birthday party.
Nice.
And so I walked around kind of, forcing a smile on my face while the kids are decorating the cupcakes that I made and we're playing the little games and all this stuff. And uh I don't know. It's kind of cinematic, you could say.
Yeah. So
I
so
wonder
did
when they'll make any movies.
so when did he get his letter? Did he have to go to an
Okay,
actual
so
licensed?
yeah. So this was that discovery I'm talking about was sort of fast forward to spring of 1995. Now, secretly in July, I know it was actually July 20th of 1993 because she submitted a sworn affidavit naming that date. He went to his first initial appointment to a PhD psychologist who is supposedly a specialist in this field. She is, by the way, still in practice in my memoir, I call her Dr. Connie. Um, and as far as the publisher and everything, they really didn't want me to use anyone's real names.
Yeah.
So, so Uta Hagen is a pen name, Nettie is a pen name. It's all pen names. Da 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 da. Da. Um, so, And then, I got accused. It's that typical pattern too. Then he's accusing me of homophobia. And and I was
Jesus
like,
Christ.
"Okay, do you remember how I grieved when those 2 dance teachers that I had studied with for years died of AIDS? Do in the 1980s, I was in this dance world with, you know, a lot of gay guys. And I wasn't asking about everyone's personal life, so I don't know if the majority of the guys were gay guys, but and there were some lesbians and women like me, and we were all there for a serious reason to do our technique classes. And but I was absolutely devastated when, for example, when Ernest Pagnano died. It was I and he was a beautiful dancer. He had danced with Lara Lubovic. He taught these very anatomically um, informed technique classes, and I mean, I really couldn't believe it. I think the
Mhm.
word transphobic wasn't really. I guess it was invented in 1989 by Davina, somebody who actually later regretted it. Um, Gabriel, Davina Gabriel, who did all the um operations and so on, and then detransitioned and unfortunately killed himself. But he had a whole uh, manifesto that he had, that was to be read at his memorial services about how he regretted everything. I think he was one of those people who was harassing the lesbians at the Mitch Fest. You know,
Oh,
like
a
it's
camp
interesting.
trans, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. I was in Wisconsin, I was part of the dance scene, I had heard of Mitch Fest,
Mhm.
but, it wasn't something that I went to because I think it was more of a music thing or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, it was based on a it was called a music festival, but really it was quite more than that. I
Ah,
mean, music was the in to the
yes,
festival, but it really was, from what I hear, an immense place just for women to exist and have all kinds of art and culture and community.
yes, yes, yeah. So, um, and where I'm at right now, so just to fast forward to my decision to write my memoir, In the Curated Woods, and it's published by iUniverse, available in a Kindle form, and you can get it through Amazon and all this under author name Uta Hagen.
And I'll link all
Um,
your information too with the
oh,
video.
thank you.
People
Yeah,
can find it, yeah.
right. And uh, also, I do have some review copies if people contact me through the contact format at utahagengrasswidow.wordpress.com. Within the continental United States, I can generally send out review copies.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I have to kinda be careful about what I put as the return address.
Yeah,
Just,
right? I know.
it's like you have to be careful with,
No, you do.
yeah, and, okay, so then, my sons kind of went into shock mode when I told them, the truth about finding their father's cross-dressing diaries, when they were 1 and 4,
Mhm,
and and the reason that I left with them one day in the fall of 1991, because the younger one was just playing in the kitchen. The older one was at his little pre-K program, and the younger one was playing with the Matchbox cars in the kitchen. You could describe me as a trad wife. I had a few little part-time jobs at that point. And I always wanted to go back to school and be a teacher, which I did do later. But um, so all of a sudden, he's got this big smile on his face and he's toddling towards me with our very big Chicago cutlery chef's knife in his hand. And I, got it out of his grasp and put it where it belonged in the drawer. It was a big one. Both of us had worked early in our marriage, before we had kids. We had both worked in restaurants and stuff, so we knew how to handle knives and so on. And and then I sat down and this, looking back, it's a realization of how gaslit I was by
mhm.
him, and how he had this power over me by criticizing me all the time, which is classic narcissist behavior. Um, I sat there thinking, okay, if I tell him about this, he's going to accuse me of being really sloppy in the kitchen. And how did that knife get under the refrigerator? And then I said to myself, like I had to really have a cup of coffee, think about this, give it a little time. And then I thought, no, he knows that we both went through this kind of training working in commercial kitchens. And so I was always particularly careful with it. And then I said, "No, he must have put it there." This was after I had discovered the diaries. He must have put it there. And so after the children went to sleep that night, I opened the drawer, said, "Here's the knife in the drawer. This is where it belongs." Now, this is what our child was suddenly doing in the kitchen while the older one was at school. So, what can you tell me about that? What's going on? And he said, "I had to hide it there because I had to hide it from myself. Because you went through my diaries,
Oh.
and you're saying that, you know, we have to get divorced.
Oh, so it's your fault.
Yeah, right. My non-acceptance of your new persona, reading and it was terrible that I read his diaries. Now, the reason that I felt compelled to find out what's in that suitcase is because he had come back from a so-called business trip to San Francisco. We lived in Brooklyn at the time, and he was, working in a tech position for an academic, a well-known academic, nonprofit. And, I had brought the children to Chicago to his, parents' apartment on Irving Park Road, and he had flown back from California, and realized as soon as he arrived that he shaved off all of his body hair.
Ah.
And he had this wiry red hair, like and I remember thinking it was August, so he couldn't cover up with sweaters and all, and so and I remember sort of looking at his mother and thinking, "Aren't you gonna ask something about that?" Like, "Huh?" Right? And and then and he wouldn't answer any questions about it. It's how I want to look. I decided that's how I wanna look, and it was like, it didn't even occur to me that was a detail in a life of cross-dressing, because this was, uh, 1992, and, I just thought that, we're this couple who has 2 little kids, and we're trying to, make a go of things and, have this actually pretty, traditional life. And I was really scrimping and saving. I was, like, still wearing my pregnancy clothes even though I had lost the weight, and he was always, wearing, very nice work clothes, nice tailored suits, Pierre Cardin, fancy shoes, the little but I realized everything, looking back, everything that he wore had a double purpose. Like, the shoes were these slip-on loafers that are kind of fancy with, like, the tassels. I'm sure they
Mhm.
have a name, but I don't know what it is. But, and I realized, oh, some women wear those too. Maybe I even had a favored pair of those when I was about 10 or 11 years old, right? And, and so all of his clothes could, with other details added or with some makeup on or something like that, kind of be androgynous and, suit his purpose of this cross-dressing activity. So, um, he right before we were heading up to Wisconsin for my niece's wedding, and he and the children and my mother-in-law went out to play while I finished the packing. He tells me, "You don't need to open my suitcase, everything there is all packed." And I sort of felt like, "Listen, buddy, we have a one-year-old and a four-year-old, and if I can't fit somebody's diapers or somebody's extra, shirt or something, in my suitcase, it's gonna go in your suitcase. That's
Yeah.
how it is when you are parents." And
Yeah.
so
No, I know.
and then it suddenly occurred to me, there's some Pandora's box is in that suitcase.
Yeah, he's hiding something.
And so I just, uh, unzipped the zipper and put my hand in, and there they were.
Yeah.
3 notebooks, fancy drawing paper, filled with his cross-dressing, adventures. And what name was he going to take? The statement, "I recognize now that I'm a transsexual. Ruth says this, Ruth says that. I know that," and he wrote also about how annoyed he got with me, how the children were so annoying. I couldn't believe it. I just was like, "We have such beautiful children who are so precious and perfect." And, whatever, not wanting to take a nap, language is going on, or like that's the normal intelligence of a child having an opinion. Like I thought I was gonna just drop down. We were like on the I had a actually I have never sunk into any kind of suicidality, but I did have sort of this vision of myself or my spiritual self or something. We were like on the 38th floor or something. I had this vision of myself, you know, falling out the window and crashing to the ground. Um, and we went through these months. Then it was the discovery of the knife that he had hidden from himself, and I said, "Okay, you can't have a suicidal adult with
Yep.
little children where they're finding a knife under the refrigerator." So I left. I bolted with the kids and went to my parents, and I consulted an attorney about what I'm able to do legally and stuff like that. And and then he detransitioned. He wrote my father a letter saying this was a midlife crisis. He criticized Ruth the charlatan. He said she's uncertified. She's completely unprofessional. I was having a midlife crisis. I wasn't diagnosed correctly. And what's interesting is, less than a year later, he's right back there.
Yeah. Did you
And
get back together with him?
I went back because I said to him, "You have a history of childhood abuse. You
Oh,
said
he
your
did.
father pulled down your pants and smacked you with his belt for minor transgressions." And his next younger sister, who was less than 2 years younger than him, had confirmed that.
Mhm.
When I first met him, he hated his father. He could not relate to his father. And so I said, "Okay, you're saying it's a midlife crisis. You're saying you want the family back together." He also kind of threatened me. He said if I stayed in Wisconsin, he would sue me for divorce from New York and force me to go back there. And he would accuse me of things, and he would try to split up our children. And then when I later I confronted him about that, and he said, "Oh, I wouldn't have really done that. I just had to say that to make you consider coming back." Right? And um I was in shock. I was not strong enough to just or I didn't really even have enough information, like I went to um the master's level therapist in Madison, Wisconsin when I was at my parents'. My parents paid for it, who was considered to be a sexologist, and he mostly helped uh, couples with their sexual relations and stuff like that. And he said to me, "Well, anybody here in Madison who says this, they're going to either have to go to Chicago or New York or California because I don't really know enough about this and I can't help them. I don't know what to tell you."
Oh, so even then they were doing like you if it was a gender issue or a transsexual issue, you had to go to a specialist.
Yes.
But I
And
would assume now I'm making an assumption here, and you can verify this or not. The specialists were all on board with it though, right?
well, the specialists were the traveling salesman for the surgeons, if you ask me.
Well, yeah, I'm not
I
surprised.
mean,
It's
is there a better term for that? I mean, they were the recruiters,
yeah.
and they thought that they were keeping people from, committing suicide. They assumed that men like Nettie, if they didn't go on that Ray Blanchard path, da 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 da, that they would commit suicide. And what's interesting is, right before I left, I went to the Gay and Lesbian Resource Center on 13th Street in Manhattan and consulted, I wish I could remember her name, with a lesbian therapist. And she let me have like 3 consultations for free. And she was so honest. This was 1991, right? And the T&Q had not taken over the Gay and Lesbian Resource Center at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And she said, "This is narcissism."
Yeah. I think she hit it on the head.
Yes. And she said, and of course he's saying that you 2 are actually lesbians and we put up with this and and it was, um, I mean, it's just it's very interesting to me. Um,
Do you think he's a narcissist?
I think absolutely he's a narcissist. Oh, yes.
Like
And
like
I
from the get-go, you think that's just something he kinda is kind of innate with him?
um Might be. There
Okay.
are some factors. He was the oldest cousin in his family, the oldest boy, and so he was born, in the early 1950s. So, these are the post-war years. All of the parents are so glad that, the war is over. We're making, we're gonna live the American dream, da 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 da. He's smart. He did well on his, whatever tests or whatever. Um, he did I mean, I sometimes think, that there's, a pathway of behavior of children who have been physically abused, where they are smart and they are trying to figure out how to appease their abuser, and they develop narcissistic strategies
Mm,
to
could
try
be.
to control this out of control adult who is doing things to them.
Yeah.
I That's just a theory of mine.
Although I I'm not gonna say it's not abusive, but at the time, that was a fairly common way to discipline kids.
I mean, I was smacked a couple of times with the flat of the hand. I think that if a child is made to take their pants down and hit with an object like a belt, that there are, psychosexual, aspects of that. Anything
I
on the
wouldn't disagree, but
bare.
I guess my point
Yeah.
is, at least in my
It
experience,
Yes.
I've heard this be a fairly common discipline that used to be definitely more of a thing than it is now. Good.
Yes.
We
Yes.
should, I think
Right.
we have I think parents nowadays have done a lot of things that they shouldn't. But I think not beating your kids is one a good thing that we've
Yes.
progressed on.
Yes, and I took all kind of workshops on that because I'm a retired kindergarten teacher.
Yeah. Okay.
But I felt and his father also, if you ask me, he had OCD.
Okay.
After in 1981 to 82 academic year, before we had children, we lived with them. We had gotten married very young. I was 21, he was 23. We lived with them kind of in the basement in Evanston, in Illinois, and his father's OCD really came out. He didn't like the way anyone else loaded the dishwasher, so he would take all the dishes out and reload the dishwasher. And if I was home doing something at the time, I was, like, working in restaurants and auditioning for dance companies. I choreographed a high school musical. I taught a few classes, all that kind of thing that you try to do if you're just graduated with a
Mm.
BFA in dance. But his father was really, really had some strange habits
Yeah.
uh
So
and
definitely, it was an intense household.
right, right.
Yeah.
A lot of anger, a lot of under the surface anger, stuff like that. So, when I said I would come back, it was under the condition that he would get into therapy to deal with his childhood experiences,
Yeah.
his anger towards his father.
Hmm.
And the truth is, I think it's entirely possible that his real deal is that he's gay or bisexual.
Really?
Yeah. Because there were some interactions back when we lived in Manhattan with guys who, kinda dressed pretty obviously gay. This would have been in the 1980s. Um, greeting him very friendly. And he was very, overtly unfriendly, like, to let him know, "No, this is, not now." So I kinda wonder
Mm.
what he was doing. There was plenty of time because of our work schedules and my dance schedule and stuff like that. There was plenty of time for him to have possibly been exploring other sexual orientations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a pretty big mess, you know?
Yeah, pretty big
It
mess.
needed a lot of sorting through,
Right, and
basically.
there's this is I mean, I have to I just feel in some ways, like, I can recall how I felt when I was going through this in the early 1990s. Inside I was saying, "Well, if only he could admit that he's gay, and then he wouldn't that's why he's attracted to men, like, then I won't have to deal with him getting manic episodes when he's taking estrogen or, all the danger and the heading towards the operations. But I mean, in every way, in terms of that pathway, the sort of fake uh, pathway towards these surgeries, which he did in 1996 at Stanford Medical.
Oof.
He spent 5 weeks. And
Wow.
then comes back and has to do the post-op stuff, and is very, very, um, demanding about that he is entitled now to 5 weeks with our 4 and 7-year-old.
You
And,
guys were divorced by then, right? You guys were not
we were
together.
in the middle of the divorce. The
Oh, okay.
divorce, the judge didn't know what to do with us. I think he made because in New York State at that time, you had to have grounds,
Mm.
and I made my grounds emotional cruelty.
Yeah.
I
Well, no,
accused him
that's
of
not gonna work. Not for women, no. Um, I think we wouldn't be we would be missing something if we didn't just address that, there's a lot of sexism and misogyny involved in so much of this as well. The treatment of women is very different than the treatment of men, even when they say that they want to be women. It's just
Oh, yeah, and I feel like one of the reasons that it's, in this, population explosion is because of women's rights, because of
right.
people
Yeah.
have rights. It's like, okay, okay, there was, that Jorgensen person, and there was, Renee Richards, who, by the way, I have 1 degree of separation from Renee Richards, and privately, Renee Richards regrets it all
Interesting.
and wishes that he
Yeah.
hadn't done it, and wishes that he had not sued the tennis organization so that he could play against women and all that stuff.
Another thing that comes up when you're talking about how this kind of started to really come out when the kids were born is I'm thinking about how oftentimes adults that have been through childhood abuse, when they have their own kids, it very much triggers their own abuse
Yes,
that they went through, and then unless you deal with that, it really messes yourself up.
yes, and I can speak a little bit more to that because, our older son, normal, intelligent kid, but you could have said, with the birth of his brother right before he turned 3 and stuff like that, his, terrible twos kind of lasted from 2 until 4, especially if he was overtired or something like that,
Yeah.
and, my grandmother, who was a one-room school teacher in rural Wisconsin, would say, "Well, the stubbornness is a sign of intelligence. It will turn into perseverance as an adult, so it's not so bad."
Yeah, if you can mold it good, like if you can.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, and I had the benefit of having taken some special ed classes and stuff like that, and, I feel that when our son got very stubborn with him and wouldn't do what he wanted him to do and stuff like that, that he was afraid that he would start getting violent like his father had when he was very young.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
I have to say that it's weird to have this conversation because even though I am a lesbian and a woman, there are parallels between your husband's experience and mine, you
I
know.
think
And one
yeah,
one of the things is that um I spiraled into this cross-sex, what you say, cross-sex
ideation.
ideation, which I
Yes,
really like.
yes.
Um it now my identification and my understanding of myself as trans started way back when I was 21. However,
Uh-huh.
I did nothing with that. I just kind of kept it
Okay.
to myself. And it wasn't till we adopted my son.
Ah,
and I am a survivor of extensive childhood abuse, and it
Ah,
wasn't until we adopted my son that I just started to crumble because,
ah,
I remember having these thoughts. I remember looking at him and thinking, he was, say, 3, we adopted him, at 3 years old. He came
okay.
to live with us at 2 and a half as foster, and then we
Yes.
adopted him at 3,
Oh,
and then
God bless.
and then around 3 and 4 years old is when my abuse really started when I was a child, and I looked at him at
Yes,
that age and went,
it all
"How
comes
could they
back.
do that to a little baby? He's so small," you know? And
Yes.
it's this horrible turmoil that I didn't even recognize was happening, and I recognize it now, but I didn't recognize it then.
Well, what I'm wondering about is, what if there I put myself, into this kind of a guru, the older sage woman role in my fantasy, who manages to have like a PhD in Jungian psychology or something like this. And what if you had someone that I just described to go to and say, I feel like I'm having some really distressing emotional stuff, and if the person said, okay, let's analyze some childhood things piece by piece, because it's very common for things to feel out of control when the child that you love and are caring for is in that same stage of life when those things were happening to you.
Yeah,
And by definition, a foster child has experienced trauma,
right. Yeah, so
because
you
that's
know,
why you
it was kind of double, we're coming
right.
together with so many of these issues, and obviously I love my son dearly. He's 14 now.
Oh, a whole new set of,
A whole new set of things, but, um, he also, he had his own trauma, so he was a difficult child. Like, he
right,
had his own issues, and that was also just extra hard too.
yes.
Um, and also I didn't have good parents. Well, my dad died when I was a baby, so I didn't have my
Uh,
biological father, but I had my mother who was abusive, and then I had a stepfather who
ah,
was abusive.
I was wondering. Uh-huh.
And, I didn't know how to raise kids because no one raised me
Yes,
properly, so there's
exactly.
also that coming into
Yes,
play, you know?
also, listen to this. I really think there's a piece of Nettie's psyche there, which involves the fact that his mother was only just under 5 foot tall, his father was 6'2". His mother, I think he had a lot of resentment against his mother and some kind of unconscious wish to have a do-over as a female because she
Mm,
didn't protect him from his father,
maybe.
you
Yeah, I
know?
mean, these things get real crazy
It
in the
gets
brain, you know?
gnarly. It
Yeah.
gets really gnarly, and, um, I mean, I was fortunate. I knew I had a little bit of training in education, and so, Uh, and then the other thing that started happening with Nettie was, um, I think it had to do with, like, breastfeeding jealousy and that kinda stuff when I was breastfeeding the second one, because I was very confident by then.
Mhm.
He would it was terrible when I first had the first one. He would say, "I don't think you're producing enough milk." And I would be like I would go take the milk I had expressed out of the bottle, out of the refrigerator, and I would say, "You see this? You know what my father, who was raised on a dairy farm, said about this? This is the richest looking milk he's ever seen. Could you stop it? I've had 3 hours of sleep last night." Like, he was really quite lost when it came to babies, even though he had younger siblings that he had supposedly taken care of and stuff,
Mhm.
um, and had, like, a job at one summer during high school taking care of kids. But uh, he became very distracted. I really felt like I didn't know him. This was, I considered myself, always very strong, having been a dancer and everything. And I would carry my bags and all this stuff, but I needed him to help once in a while. I needed him, and he went through this phase. I think he was on the estrogen already, and he went through this phase where he didn't wanna be strong and male.
God.
And I'd be
Yeah.
like, I was the Sherpa, right? And
Yeah.
I still have dreams about this. I have these dreams where I'm carrying all these bags and we're going somewhere and I'm kind of lost and then I'm worried about whether the children are still holding my hand and, you know, um, and the thing is, he made finally, when it all comes out, he makes this big deal about how he's following, he says, the Blanchard protocols.
Mm.
And, he describes them in his own, fast way to suit his purpose and glorifies Ray Blanchard and all this stuff. And I didn't look it up real thoroughly. I just knew I was dealing with an extreme narcissist. I mean, there was there, then he went through this phase of wearing over sexy clothes. I mean, he's like 36
Mhm.
and he's wearing mini skirts and over the knee boots and like I'm being this really frumpy mother. I don't want to get accused, right, of seeming anything floozy or that he could accuse me of bringing bad men into the children's lives or something like this, but I'm dropping the children off. And he's sitting in front of this, um, you know, restaurant bakery in Park Slope, and and he's wearing that outfit I just described. And there's this dude chatting him up. And then the thought bubble above my head, like, I really feel, can't we just move past this, this 10 years now that we're gonna have to live through and have the really funny movie that is partially
Right.
Ooch's life. Like, you could probably find some really funny stuff out of like, you
There's
can find
yeah,
the
I know it's
hilarious butch lesbian stuff, and make some kind of a movie combining all of this because the thought bubble above my lip, or if I could have been like, "Oh, there you are, Carol, look at what my husband is doing." Should we go warn him about those guys? Don't
yeah,
don't
it's
bring him home, not when the kids are there, but I couldn't accuse him of anything because I was already being accused of getting ultra religious and doing it like it was all nonsense. It was
yeah.
unbelievable. He accused me of assaulting him. He's 4 inches taller
So
than
he did go, the legitimate route of transition?
except that the legitimate route is actually never that.
No, but I'm just using that
For 2
term.
years. Yes,
What
he
people are gonna say when they
yes.
say, "Oh, there used to be this really great path that was," they did thorough evaluations and they addressed all the mental health issues, and my thing is, okay, first of all, I know enough of the history of
Yeah.
how this all started and where it came
Right,
from
right,
to know
right.
that's bullshit.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
the other
John
part of
Money.
this, yeah, Harry Benjamin, even further
Yes.
back, Hirschfield, even further
Yeah,
back
yeah.
than that,
Right.
but um, even then, logically thinking about this, what person in their right mind is going to want to do this? I
Right.
don't see,
You're
like,
by definition, you are sick.
yeah, I mean, who
Doctor
wants to cut their body up and cut their genitals off? Like, what
right.
the
Well, you know what? And, I went to, actually, I had to do this, this is during the divorce, probably 1997. Our older son expressed suicidal ideation at school and at home, I think twice at school and once at home with details. And so that's like the magic 3. I've been trained, New York City
Mhm,
Department of Education, how serious it is. And the requirement by the Department of Education is that the child has to be seen by a super certified PhD psychologist or psychiatrist to make sure that, it's just an ideation. That's really where I got the idea of to use cross-sex ideation because when in the training for teaching young children, they talk about children's suicidal ideation, when to make sure it's serious because there, unfortunately, in New York City, there have been a couple of kids who,
mhm,
jumped out of a window or something like that. So, this was serious, and Nettie refused to have anything to do with the therapy because, of course, only Dr. Connie, his sexologist, would be, the right person,
Why? This has nothing to
and
do with that.
right, I know. And to me, that should be, you know, that should be duly noted that the father of the children is saying this, right?
Yeah.
And isn't participating. And personally, I think just the fact that the principal of the school then later signed off after, I was sort of, this guy didn't take any, he didn't give me a break. Typical New York City, either psychiatrist or PhD psychologist who is, credentialed and stuff and court qualified. Um, he's because see the city actually has to protect itself from liability.
Yeah.
So so we went for maybe 2 months, and Dr. Ryan, this court qualified psychologist, said, it appears that it was just trauma and a little over dramatization, and he's going to be okay and stuff. And but he signed off on our therapy being finished without Nettie ever participating in this. And so did I know that it has to go to the superintendency. So did the principal, who happened to be a gay guy. He told me, "We don't know anything about this. I'm just going to tell you." Like, I'm just going to tell you, we gay guys, we don't really know anything about these guys who want to be women. This is not us. And I just thought that's really interesting that he decides to tell me that. I didn't ask him, right? So and then it has to be cleared by the superintendent's office. So all of these people cleared a child who had expressed suicidal ideation at the age of 8, in school twice and at home once, and um, did this with the full participation of the mother and his younger brother, for part of it. And the father was never a part of it, wasn't listed in any of the notes. And I personally think they should have written him some kind of official letter and said, we can't sign off on this,
Yeah.
um, because you haven't participated. But again, that's the preferential treatment. And this is what
Well,
the
it's the preferential treatment of men,
yeah,
basically.
right.
Because still even to this day, most of society just, even if it's implicitly a bias, believes that the mother holds most of the responsibility for raising the kids. I mean, you
Yes.
you see these men getting praised like they're doing some kind of great goddamn thing because they get up with the kid at night.
Oh, I
It's your
know.
kid too. What do you
He
wait?
wouldn't do it.
Because he
I
does the laundry. Oh God, wow, he does the laundry. It's just like what?
no. I did all the work.
I
I
know
did
you did. I'm
all the
sure you
work.
did because most women do.
Yeah. And he came home and criticized. Yeah. And he would, this is something I did on a recent thing on my channel. He when he came back from business trips, which I think now are business trips,
Mhm.
right? He would come back with some present for me, which was an article of clothing with no tag on it.
I saw that video. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, because
very
that's a recent
interesting.
one. I know. Yeah. So,
And so shitty. Like, what?
yeah, not sexy.
It's just a really
And the
crappy
thing is,
gift.
but I really didn't think about this until just a few years ago. I'm
Yeah.
30 years out of this. And still sort of, as I'm gathering data, I have data on 60 trans widows' experiences now. And this is the thing, though, I just want to touch on what this, very highly qualified psychologist said. He said, I had a few sessions alone with him, and he said, well, this is a field of psychology that the rest of us don't really have any expertise in, and we're not um, qualified, or we just don't really know. But the truth is, uh, it's impossible to tell the difference between someone who is masochistic and someone who wants to have their genitals um, modified
Hmm.
for the
Yeah.
purpose of appearing as the opposite sex. And then see, the thing is that I just it's such a charade, like,
So
um,
what do you think of Blanchard
I
and that
think
his whole thing?
I think that he's had a good ride, and people have excused him.
Right?
I have this feeling that you and I have the same opinions of a certain individual named Buck Angel, as well as Blanchard.
Yeah. I remember on Twitter one time, basically hopping into one of Blanchard's, because a lot of GCs will think Blanchard's like great, you know.
Yeah,
And I remember hopping into a thing and I said, yeah, Blanchard basically encouraged a whole bunch of dudes to transition with no thought of what was doing to their wives, their children, their families, no thought to what it was doing to other women in society.
right,
When basically Blanchard's like, oh, this poor guy, let's let him
right,
go into women's spaces. No one considered the
yeah,
repercussions of letting men
right,
who, for who I believe are sick, oftentimes it oftentimes it is a sexual paraphilia,
yes.
and the AGP dudes especially really, really want to get in lesbian spaces, really, really want to, like,
Yeah,
if I don't know if you've ever read The Transsexual Empire by Janice Raymond,
I know of it.
but I do recommend it because
Yeah.
her insight and her interviews that she did way back in the day. She did an actual interview with John Money, you know.
Oh,
Yeah. The book was published in 79,
I know.
and she's a lesbian and she's a radical feminist, but
Okay.
her ideas and perception and what she gathered there was just so telling. It's like, it basically, she told us what was coming way before it showed
Yes.
up, you know.
Yeah.
And really her thing is she talks about how these men, they do view it as, I mean, it's basically kind of like a rape. They want to force themselves into women's spaces, and they want
Yes.
to be there, and it's disgusting. And this
Yes.
is something that, like, so Blanchard had a part in this, right?
Oh, he did.
You
He
know,
did.
and I'm not
I
impressed with
what
that
do
at
I
all.
call them? Uh, the four horsemen. I'm all the same about I mean, maybe Zucker, he's getting very old and stuff. Maybe he had good intentions, but he went along with the nonsense. Blanchard, Zucker, Cantor, Bailey. I call
Yeah.
them the four horsemen of the charade. It's I think they did it thinking that, uh, this was the sexy part of psychology to be a part of. It made us cool, and,
You could make a name for yourself.
you could make a
Yeah.
name for yourself, and that is the bias and conflict of interest of any academic,
Hmm.
because I'll get published right away if I write a thing on this, and I only need to have 12 subjects in my study, and they'll still publish it because, it's so rare. There aren't that many. So, you know, and the thing is, Nettie did not do the Blanchard protocol, but it was pretended that he did.
Yeah.
Because we had children who were cognizant of what kind of clothes he was wearing,
Yeah.
what he was doing when he was going around, all that stuff, and, um, he didn't tell them what process he was in. He expected me to handle that after he came back from California. He
The,
expected me to then explain to them why his face was all swollen because he had a whole lot of, electrolysis.
the thing that strikes me too about the therapy world and their role in this is that, again, I'm repeating, but they don't take into consideration the impact that this is going to have on the family. They just
Oh,
don't think,
no.
they just don't, just none at all, just none at all. And I'm like, how can you, like, for me,
Blanchard, yeah,
example,
yeah.
looking back on my therapy, um, she never, I think she asked once or twice, how's your wife feel about it? Just didn't
Oh,
pursue it anymore, you know? And it's just like, now looking back on it, I think, this was a big, big trauma to my family. This,
okay.
and this is another reason why I've always been a little apprehensive talking with trans widows, because I
Yeah,
feel like I was part of that other side. Not, I mean, men and women are different for family in a lot of ways, but my wife has suffered the things you talk about. I've
Yes.
heard her talk about,
Right, right, right.
those feelings. So
Yes.
there is these similarities.
Yes. But you were brainwashed. That's I mean, is it hard for you to hear that?
It it is because I just feel like when it came to my family, I just should have said no. I just should have realized that I shouldn't do that to them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think I have a hard time forgiving myself over the pain I put my family through.
But what you're doing now is so important. I'm seeing this. This is a path that many detransitioners have. I see it with Ray Williams. I don't know if you follow him.
Mm-mm.
Um, he's a male detransitioner. Um, I I've seen a certain kind of evolution of thought for Richie Herron. Um, I sort of feel like the thing is these therapists were doing everyone wrong, doing
Mhm.
everyone an injustice by first of all, you know, letting very faulty published research be used as the foundation for this whole idea and not talking about like getting down to the actual nitty gritty of what are the qualities and quantities of the nerve endings of women's genitalia below the waist and and how could a male possibly have something surgically put there which is going to have what women have. It's not possible.
Well, I recently actually just did an interview yesterday with another woman, and we talked about this, how just logically, anybody who's had any surgery, even the most minor surgery, knows that there is
Yeah.
always sensation loss
Art.
and there's always scar tissue. There's just always something,
Yes.
there's a repercussion from every
Yes.
surgery.
Yes.
So how can you ever think, just logically, that you can manipulate, cut apart the genitals and not basically just be doing away with them? Like the
Right.
sensation loss, the nerve endings, it's going to be gone. There's no way to recreate that.
Right.
There's no way to get that back.
Right.
And so you basically you are you're just you're cutting people's genitals off. You're just doing away
It's a
with it. You're doing
fraud.
away with their ability to have any
Yes.
sexual
Right.
activity at all, any
Yeah.
sexuality, in any relationship.
Yes,
You're
it's a
destroying people's
fraud.
ability to
And this is
connect.
like this one point that I really want to make is way back then, um, uh, in the early 1990s, there weren't I was told that women weren't really doing this, that kind of surgery doesn't really work. And so I think there's a history there yet to be written about the recruitment of especially butch lesbians into this cult. And I think that it was, again, just like with children, um, bringing children and lesbians along into this was um, a fraudulent use of people, a fraudulent use and abuse of people to justify men who are mostly autogynephiles.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of literature and some proof on that written.
Yeah.
Even some of the stuff I've read about very early transsexuals coming into the gay community. Um, the vast majority of them were heterosexual men who
Oh, I
were,
know.
you know, they weren't.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they weren't gay
Right.
men who did transition. They were, but what I found really interesting one time was, and I didn't know this, but um, the thing that got the gay men starting to transition was the straight men coming in, the straight transsexuals coming into the gay community that then let the gay men know that, oh, this is possible. This was something I read, and this would have been in the mid '60s. I want to say probably in New York. Um, that was kind of one of those, like before Stonewall and stuff. It was that kind of thing where yes, you had the gay dudes who would do the cross dressing and
Right.
prostitute and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
But this whole idea of actually medically transitioning was brought in by autogonophilic dudes showing
Right.
up. So
And
it's
it's
very
also
interesting, you
yeah,
know.
and it has to be that it's also the doctors because it's the doctors and the medical establishment because, of
Well,
course,
yeah,
these
and these
surgeries
quack
are
doctors.
going to take hours, and to justify all the staff, all the nurses, multiple doctors, the operating room, all of this stuff, and I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of surgeries and scarring. A few years ago, I developed cranial scar neuroma, which is a thing.
Mhm.
And I figured out all these movement things that I have on my movement playlist on my channel help me to relax my neck, and I'm I'm able to deal with it. But I'm saying to myself, you know, you don't want to have those kind of scars
No,
below the belt.
right?
And
Yeah. It
yeah, and so I mean,
it's I think it was Richie that's called it a sexual lobotomy.
yes,
And I thought that's so apt to, like, yeah, that's what it is.
right.